Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is our second official event for Native American Heritage Month. We screened a film last week, and so this is our first speaker of the programming for this month. So my name is Melissa Horner. I am president of Board Directions Indigenous Peoples and Allies, and I'm a doctoral student in the Department of Sociology. And yeah, I'm super excited to welcome Corinne Grey Cloud to speak with us today and share some of her knowledge with us. Corinne is a public educator. She's a really amazing educator on social media platforms. So feel free to follow her on there. Corinne 86 is her handle. And Corinne also comes from a theater and journalism background. And so she sort of does it all. It's really amazing to have her here. And I think the last thing I'll just acknowledge is just that here at the Land Grant University, these are Wajayjay, Osage, Missouri, Oto, among many other nations have relationships with these lands. And so land acknowledgements tend to be a little performative these days, and people sort of just say them without thinking about things. And so I'm just going to acknowledge that we are here, and that part of the work Corinne does, part of the work Board Directions does, addresses issues that land acknowledgements ought to be addressing, thinking about Indigenous peoples, thinking about what we mean by land and place and those really important relationships to communities and nations and people. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Corinne.
Lovely. Thank you so much for being here. This is fantastic. How many people are here? It's really nice to see that there's an interest in hearing about issues that exist within Indian countries. And so yeah, my name is Corinne Grey Cloud, and I'm Lakota and Mohawk, and I live in Mission, South Dakota, with my husband and our 2 kids. He's 3. We're expecting a little boy in April. And I'm going to just share a little bit about myself and about my family, because I feel it's really important that we this right now in human space, because what we're going to be talking about are some pretty heavy topics. And also at the end, I'm going to address how I suggest you care for yourself after this presentation, because this is pretty heavy, and I will be doing things also to care for myself. That's definitely part of my routine when I present on this topic. So I live in Mission on 10 acres in a little single wide trailer home with my husband and our kiddos, and we live next door to a buffalo named Isabel. And we have a bull calf named Ferdinand and 4 horses. So I got into education about 8 years ago. I was a paraeducator for special education in the elementary school system. And I did that, and I just loved being able to speak to youth. And it really kind of exposed me to where our education system is currently with its understanding of Indigenous people. And there are gaps. There are understandings there. So, and that kind of set the stage for me. When I got into journalism, I worked for powwows.com. I still work for them. And I got into journalism for them. And the articles were primarily focused on dancing, as well as the competitive side of powwows and the culture that exists there. And I suggested to my boss at the time, why don't we shift our articles to be a little more on the our own media that covers our own issues. This was pre-Standing Rock. And then once some other major issues in our communities arose that needed more coverage, we started utilizing that space for talking about Standing Rock. We're talking about missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And it was a space for us as journalists to speak on our own issues. So that's kind of, I took that education and I took that journalism, and I started using my social media, and stories came into play on Instagram, which was a neat little tool. And I said, well, I can make this like a floating PowerPoint. I can use my stories instead of just here's my breakfast to here's a major issue that is in my life. I think you need to hear about it. And So yeah, that's how I got to be doing what I'm doing now. I used to work for the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition under their sex trafficking in Indian country federal grant. I was the grant manager for that, and then stepped away from that to begin consulting. I still work very hard in raising awareness on human trafficking issues within Indian countries, still a passion of mine. And as a survivor of sexual assault, this is something very close to me because I could have very easily been part of any of the statistics that you're going to hear today. So when people say, well, why do you present on MMIW or MMIR? It's because I'm very aware of how close I came to being one of these missing relatives. And I take that responsibility of being a survivor very seriously. And I think, oh, how can I give back? By educating. Here are my talents. Here's how I'm going to use them. So here's some of the things that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about MMIW versus MMIR, the phrase, symbols that you're going to see in the movement, where they would originate from, key players in the movement, organizations. A lot of the statistics come from Garden of Truth, which is a study that is from the organization I used to work with. And this is a presentation, but if you're interested in seeing any of those, I can get a link to Melissa that will take you to any of the studies referenced here, and then you can absolutely have access to those resources to further do research on your own. And then we'll talk about grassroots efforts, some of the legislation that exists today because of the movement, and then things you can do, real tangible things you can do in your allyship and your activism that can cause some actual real change on a micro and macro level. So what is MMIW, MMIR? Well, first, missing murdered Indigenous women was the original term, but I like that we've included MMIR because that is more inclusive for our Two-Spirit and LGBTQ community relatives. This is not just an issue that affects women. This affects our Two-Spirit relatives on a very large scale. In fact, Sovereign Bodies Institute recently partnered with a gentleman named Lenny Hayes, who is a major activist for Two-Spirit communities, to conduct some pretty substantial research on different abuse and trauma that happens to Two-Spirit relatives in this landscape, right? The sexual trauma as well as physical abuse. So we use MMIW, we use MMIR. If you want, they have hashtags for both on Twitter and Instagram that take people down a whole rabbit hole of information that I always send people off with as well. But this is an issue that exists all over in the US and in Canada and even into Mexico, though you're going to hear it more often referred to for the First Nations people as well as the United States. We've worked really tirelessly to bring awareness to this issue, and I will say that a lot of credit needs to go to our youth. The youth created the hashtag and came up with the idea of using social media as a tool of education for an issue that has existed since first contact, right? MMIR is not a new issue. This is not something new in Indian country. The murder and assault of our women and relatives have occurred since first contact here. So people always say, what's causing MMIW? What's causing this issue? You want the long version or the short version? Because I can tell you all of the contributing factors, all of the risk factors that contribute to it, but it's colonization. That's what it is. So in the US, Native American women are more than 3 times as likely to experience violence than any other demographic. In addition, 1 in 3 Native women is sexually assaulted during her lifetime, and non-natives perpetrate 67% of these assaults. So that's more than 4 in 5 American Indian and Alaska Native women and men have experienced violence in their lifetime, and more than 1 in 3 experienced violence in the past year, according to a new report from the NIJ funded study. Next. So yeah, the movement started at first contact, and the hashtag started in the early 2000s. And yeah, in case you need an explanation, when the first colonizers came to North America. For centuries, sexual violence has been a cornerstone of treatment of Native American populations, integral to colonization and displacement. That's a commonly used tactic by colonizers when you go into a new society. You want to gain control of the people. You use physical violence, sexual violence. You manipulate their food supplies, anything to gain control and to weaken who you're trying to gain control over. This is a very common tactic that's used. So these, I'm going to highlight, these are some of the organizations. Whenever I do any kind of educating, if I'm speaking at Google or whatever, I always, they're like, what can I do? And the first thing people want to do is they want to give money. And I think that's great, but that's bare minimum. Giving them money is bare minimum. But these are the organizations who are major players in research, in action. They do a ton to raise awareness. And any of these, I would encourage supporting or sharing their research or using the information they provide when you are like, as an ally, I'm pissed off, I want to tell people about it. These are all great resources. So we have the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, and they have smaller branches that go by community, which is great. This is where I used to work, the Minnesota Indian and Sexual Assault Coalition. They have a lot of studies that they're doing and a whole bunch of resources. Indian Collective is another great one. They do a lot of walks, especially in Rapid City and South Dakota area. Sovereign Bodies Institute is based in California, but they work all over. And I mean, like last week, they had me on a thread. There was a young 14-year-old girl who was missing in our community, and they mobilized like in a day. The next day, she was found. So this was amazing use of resources, and it took their ability to work with local police and to be the liaison, the cultural liaison between that force that was there and the families and the people. Because if you have a people who are used to being oppressed, they're not going to be willing to work with the police force who wants to help find them unless you can come to some cultural understanding to bring the two together. And that takes some finesse sometimes, right? Because you have to understand there's trauma there. You have to have a way to work together. Urban Indian Health Institute is based in Washington. They put out the most recent study about, I think it was 98% of the Native women in Seattle that they interviewed had experienced sexual assault in their lifetime. 98%, which is probably actually higher if people were being completely honest, or if they fully understood like persuasion, that kind of thing can also be considered. It's probably 100%, which is shocking and actually really sad. Yeah, so these organizations are great. MMIW, who is missing, they're on Instagram. They do a lot of their donations and direct funds go right to families who need financial support to go be somewhere, stay in a hotel if their relative is missing somewhere else. So the youth is a huge, these are all communities and groups that contribute to the movement, real change within the movement. The youth, huge. I have sat in on planning meetings and listened to our youth be passionate about finding their mother, finding their cousin, being a friend of someone who has gone missing. And you hear these stories from these relatives, and you know, it just breaks your heart that they're so young and already they know all of this trauma. They're holding all of this trauma. They're feeling all of the responsibility to find their relative. But they're also driven, and they're also, coming with all these new ideas and ways of thinking about things that a lot of our elders maybe haven't come to or accepted. Like when you see a youth so passionately explain, there's something that the elders are like, oh, we have prophecies about this. Like this is the change in our communities, is our youth are going to lead the way. So the youth is a huge player in the movement. Community groups. Most communities, including reservations and urban spaces, have local groups that organize grassroots marches, meetings, and awareness campaigns on MMIR. Like this. This will be a community group organized event here. You're learning about an issue that maybe you hadn't heard of before or whatever it is. Little opportunities like this, I was telling him, what was I saying? Even if 8 people show up, I'll be so happy, because that's 8 people who are going to leave this space with more knowledge about what's happening to my people that can go out and create some real change. Nonprofit organizations, Native specific nonprofit organizations, they rally and support for funding. They get a lot of grants to help with this issue. There's a lot of grants available that help fund research and awareness raising. I know the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition has a march every year that I think we had 10,000 people show up in Minneapolis. It was huge. And I went live for powwows.com because I was like, I know I work for you guys, but I'm also going to go live for powwows.com. This is really fantastic. And I just kind of like panned and showed how many people were there. And these are natives and non-natives, like allies, just there showing up. And where do we go? And Dr. Jane Sanders was there also. She showed up, as well as Peggy Flanagan, who is the lieutenant governor in Minnesota. She's native, she's Ojibwe. She was there. I mean, all kinds of people wanted to make sure that they were doing what they could in that space. And there's a lot of things that you can do as an ally at something like a march, which we'll get into later, which are really special. Social media educators, I have so many friends, I call them friends. I mean, I have so many people that I'm close with, relatives who use their social media platforms for education, who take that time in that space to talk about something like this, which is really heavy. And it's really, I love in a way that, like, I have a friend, my friend Jordan, she educates on MMIW through running. Okay, so she uses her platform, she runs marathons with the red handprint on her face, and she writes the names of missing relatives on her body while she's running. And so if she has something coming up, an education opportunity to speak on this issue, and she's like, we're both pregnant right now. So she's like, I don't know if I have the energy for this. I was like, I got it, I'll do that. Or I can't do that one. Can we ask Sunny Red Bear from Indian Collective if she would be able to remark on that? Okay, cool, I'll pass that to her. So we've kind of developed this support of each other. We all know that the work is really difficult to talk about, but we all know it needs to get talked about. And so we've kind of like sistered each other in a way, and been like, okay, I got this, you got this one, you want to handle this one, and you have to do that. Because if I just took everything that was thrown at me, I'd be drained already. And I have to, sometimes we say no. Sometimes I'm like, I can't this month or whatever it is. Like, I plan on taking all of December to do nothing, because November is like, I feel like at the end of November, I'm like that woman from Titanic, where I'm like, it's been 84 years. Because you're just so tired by the end of it. It's just a lot. It's a lot of education. So some of the symbols you'll see in the movement. This woman has a red handprint on her face. Red in general is the color that we chose to represent missing and murdered Indigenous women for multiple reasons. But there are some Native cultures that believe that red is the color that spirits can see. So we're calling the spirits home. There's also this cultural idea of the handprint is keeping us from speaking on the topic, or it represents those who are not able to talk about their assault or their death or why they're missing. It depends on who you ask, which culture, because everyone has a different approach to this understanding. But this symbol is recognizable. So you see this handprint on the mouth, you will know it's for the MMIW, MMIR movement. The red dress, if you see sometimes like store windows or homes will hang a red dress. I feel like there's more, you'll see it more in Canada, the idea of hanging the red dress. I have seen it a few times in Rapid City and on the reservation where we live, but I feel like it's more of a thing in First Nations up in Canada. But hanging a red dress in your yard, or there's been art movements to hang a red dress in a forest with the number of missing women in that community. It's pretty powerful when you think that each dress represents a woman, a person. It really hits you. There's a museum in Winnipeg that has a whole art exhibit of just hanging red dresses. And I was like, when I went to visit it, I was like, it was pretty impactful. And that's what we want this to be. We want all of these symbols to be impactful. I want you, when you see these things, to be like, oh my God, this is shocking, or I feel uncomfortable with what I'm seeing, or this is causing me to feel something, or I'm confused. What does your medallion mean, Corinne? I've never seen this before. What is this? Oh, your earrings, they're so pretty. What does your earrings mean? My husband said that earlier. Your earrings are really... It's an opportunity for me to talk on this topic. That's what it is. I'm deliberately putting these things on because I'm making the choice that I want to talk about it. When I am done and spent and I don't have the energy anymore, I take them off. You're not going to ask me about MMIW or MMIR because you're not seeing these things that are going to prompt you to ask me. But when I fly, sometimes I'm like, I got the time today. I have the energy today. I think I want someone to ask me, and then I put them on intentionally because I want someone to learn. Maybe it's creator telling me like, today's a day someone's gonna need to know about this. I want you to do this today. I don't know why. I don't know who I'm gonna sit next to. I don't know who I'm gonna see that day, but I'm gonna wear it. And if they ask me a question about it, something like this is kind of like in your face, right? It's hard to ignore. So it gives me the opportunity to take that time and space to talk about it. Yeah, so how does this happen? Let's talk about some of the colonialism, right? But let's talk about some of the contributing factors that really, like on a micro level, can cause some of these numbers to be so high. So you guys know who Blair Imani is? She's an educator. She's on social media. She's written a bunch of books. But Blair Imani teamed up with me to do an educational series on her Instagram page about MMIR last year. And we put together this graphic that talks about, I was telling her, I was like, I don't know, it's not like one thing. It's like this perfect storm of like oppressive atmospheres that create. She's like, oh my gosh, I'm so like, that's perfect. Let's make a graphic. And we came up with this cloud and like, always, these are the different contributing factors that can create this perfect storm that can result in a woman becoming missing or murdered, or a relative becoming missing or murdered. So we have colonization, displacement, right? You take an Indigenous group of peoples and you take them out of where they're familiar, you take them out of their homelands, you take them away from their access to culture, take them away from everything that they know. You're displacing them and putting them somewhere else. That's a whole bunch of issues just on its own. Attempted genocide and indoctrination and actual genocide. I would say attempted and actual because we have lost a lot of it. Dehumanization. Also what falls under dehumanization is things like mascots, Halloween costumes. All of those things, all of those seemingly innocent things contribute to you looking at a Native person as a cartoon or as a sexualized object. Okay. Impoverishment. What happens when you're living in extreme poverty? We do all kinds of risky lifestyle choices to survive. These are survival tactics. Okay, and we'll get into that. So this is another major issue that exists around the MMIR movement and education. And I had, when I did my presentation at Google, hold on a second. They were like, we have a lot of people who are here because they care about the environment. We'd like to do an environmental presentation. Can you talk about maybe like the pipelines or something to do with the environment? And I was like, I'd like to talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women because that is an environmental issue. And they're like, huh? How is that an environmental issue? And I was like, because here it is, extractive industries come into Native communities, reservation communities, and they will create these, we call them man camps. So like that's how, if you go to any Native community and you talk about man camps, we already know what you're talking about. They come into these communities. In every community, there has been an extractive industry. The numbers for the missing, murdered women are through the roof. Or even just like physical assaults. I mean, every statistic for every existing crime in that area goes up. And the reason for that is because you have these temporary housing communities that are created and erected very quickly because there's a demand for a number of workers to come into a small community. They need them now, they need them fast, and we need you to work 2 to 4 weeks at a time, and then you're going to go back to wherever you live in whatever state. So you have men coming into this community who are not from the area, who are there for a short amount of time, high concentrated areas, living all in one space, unregulated. All kinds of crime happens in these areas. And unfortunately, when a crime is committed, the perpetrators are not staying long enough for anything to be done about it. The other issue is if they happen to be on reservation land when the crime is committed. A non-native who commits a crime against a native person on reservation land, they cannot be held accountable for those actions. It has to be done by a federal officer. And that is a nightmare to have happen, which is why so many of these cases just either never get reported or they don't have follow through. Next slide. So one of the responsibilities I had with USAC, Women's Assault Coalition, was I organized a national conference on sex trafficking in Indian country. We had the FBI, we had all kinds of police forces from communities that existed around reservations that had issues with man camps. They had established task forces specifically to address the human trafficking that was happening in these areas with extractive industries. One of the police officers had to go by, we couldn't film her speaking, we couldn't talk about her name, but she shared her experience going into a man camp. This was North Dakota, Mandan Hilatsa, Arikara land. She went on to drive, just driving around. I don't even think she had a call. She was just driving around the man camp and she knows shit goes down there. She found a toddler walking around naked who had been assaulted by multiple men at this place. A toddler. When the police officer told this, you could tell that it was still extremely traumatic for her because she started crying. She was a mother also. And so to come across that and to not be able to do anything or to bring anyone to justice as a police officer who lives for that purpose, to fight the bad guy in that space, this woman who, that was why she did what she did. And she's a Native woman. This is a Native woman who joined for that purpose in her community to protect her people, and she wasn't able to. So the reason why, if you are into law, I highly suggest looking up the Supreme Court case, Oliphant versus Suquamish. It's from 19, where are we now? Did I? Thank you. I have terrible time remembering numbers. 1978 Supreme Court case. Basically, it stripped tribes of the right to arrest and prosecute non-Indians who commit crimes on Indian land. If both victim and perpetrator are non-Indian, a county or state officer takes the arrest. If the perpetrator is non-native and the victim is an enrolled member, only a federally certified agent has the right. I'm sorry, that's so disgusting to me. Like, talk about removing somebody's sovereignty. That to me is just absolutely deplorable. And I have heard case after case after case of someone who has been assaulted. There was a case recently of Dollar General, a Dollar General that exists on reservation land, where a young girl was assaulted by her manager who was non-native and went to report it, which first of all, on its own, takes major gumption, and they couldn't do anything about it. They didn't do anything about it. Yeah. So anyway, if the opposite is true, tribal officer can make the arrest, but the case still goes to federal court. So it's messy, it's complicated. People don't want to handle the paperwork oftentimes. And so there's a lot of pressure locally from some of these communities that are like, don't do anything about it, don't report it, and let's keep it hushed, especially the cultural, there's some cultural shame around assault, which we are working so hard to eradicate, to encourage our Native relatives who are assaulted to please come forward, and we're not going to be shamed for it. And as a community, we need to better rally around these people. But that's another issue, right? But human trafficking is huge. It's a huge issue. I mean, I could do a whole presentation just on human trafficking. Lack of resources. So this is not a new thing in Indian country. I mean, the federal government has been depriving Native nations of resources that were promised to them in the over 370 treaties that have been broken in the over 400 years that colonizers have been writing and saying. This doesn't even count the treaties that were drawn up but never ratified, such as the whole bevy that was found in a judge's drawer in California, like from years ago. So lack of resources, this is huge also when you think of general funding for like IHS, right, Indian Health Services. If our IHS had better funding and better supports, better mental health counseling, then maybe our members would turn less to risky behaviors to treat their trauma, and they would get actual healing and help instead of trying to self-medicate, which is another huge issue that exists within our community. Poverty, lack of resources that Indian country has directly led to poverty in most Native communities. Median household income in 2017 for American Indians and Alaska Natives was $40,215. This compares to $57,652 for the U.S. as a whole. I'm not impressed. So the point is, poverty is a huge contributing factor to risky behaviors or lifestyles, which put you in the direct path of some pretty violent situations, right? If I have to like feed my kids and I have nothing in my house, but there's an opportunity to sell drugs or to prostitute myself in order to feed my babies, you bet your fucking ass I'm going to do what I can to feed my babies, without a doubt. Am I putting myself in a risky situation where my life would be directly in danger, especially when we consider that most perpetrators who come for Native women who are sexualized are white men, and then that escalates to physical violence, which escalates to murder? As a Native woman, I'm going to be like, right now I have a crying baby. What am I going to do? Let my baby starve? I'm gonna make risky decisions because I want my family to be okay. Poverty put me in that position. I didn't choose poverty as that woman, right? I had it thrust upon me for generations. Maybe my mom also lived in poverty. Maybe my grandma lived in poverty because we were displaced from our home and had no choice. Do you see how that compounds on itself? How each of those things just like adds to another no choice, no opportunity to pull myself out of that horrible situation. It's like super discouraging. It is very discouraging. Racism. Does that even need explaining? I don't even, like, that's another thing that contributes to it, right? So, so I'm going to go over some of the statistics from those studies I was telling you about. The Garden of Truth is one that interviewed, interviewed women in the Bemidji area who were survivors of sex trafficking and prostitution. Okay, this was done, I think the study was done in 2009, but it's still totally relevant. So, of the women, they interviewed 105 Native women in the Bemidji area, and just read these statistics for a second. Like, these are deplorable. 92% of those women, 92% of 105 women had been raped. 79% had been sexually abused as children by an average of 4 perpetrators. 48% have been used by more than 200 sex buyers during their lifetimes. 16% have been used by at least 900 sex buyers. 92% of these women wanted to escape prostitution, but had no other option. 84% had been physically assaulted in prostitution. 72% suffered traumatic brain injuries in prostitution. 98% were currently or previously homeless. 52% had PTSD comparable, that's comparable to veterans who come home from war. These numbers are ridiculous. There's another statistic, which I don't think is on the next slide, but 67% of the buyers, the sex buyers, were white men. And I reference that study a lot when I talk about the importance of not dressing up as an Indian maiden for Halloween, right? Because when you sexualize a Native woman, what you're doing is you're feeding into the dehumanization of her, and you're making her sexualized. And even though you're having a fun time, you just have a good Halloween party and you're a new sorority and you're just having a fun weekend. What it's doing is it's feeding the perpetrators watching. And pretty soon, I can't tell you how much porn exists that romanticize the rape of Native women. It's disgusting. But I've had to use that as part of my research, and it exists. Once that's not enough, once that pornography is not fulfilling their desires anymore, they escalate. Soon they need it. Soon they come to a Native prostitute. Soon they rape her themselves. So all of these things are statistics that exist, which shouldn't exist, but it's important that we know about them and understand, because when there is a victim of murder, how many times in the media do you hear a prostitute was murdered? They do everything they can to dehumanize based on her lifestyle or way of surviving, so that there's not so much of an uproar or as much attention. Oh, well, yeah, of course she ended up murdered. She was living this risky lifestyle. It just removed your access to empathy for that situation. Next slide. Sovereign Bodies Institute, they have, please check out their website. They have a new study that came out specifically about how Two-Sprit relatives have been affected with prostitution, sexual assault, physical assault, that kind of thing. And their numbers for missing are still being recorded. But there are some difficulties with recording missing relative numbers, and there's a reason for that. So here's the disproportionate. So out of all of the missing cases, I think there's 5,716 missing cases that exist currently, and only 116 of those are logged with the Department of Justice. 116 out of 5,700 relatives missing. That's ridiculous. We know that it's more. We know that it's more than the 5,716 because there's differences. There's issues like if the coroner gets the body and they just look at them and say, white woman, without finding out is this person enrolled with their nation somewhere. In that case, we have to put this, is this person missing? Are they currently enrolled somewhere? I gotta put it in NAMUS. All of the things, there's so many discrepancies because of a lack of training and a lack of knowledge for so many different people who are in charge of those investigations. If they had more training and more knowledge about how to properly document, we could get a better idea of numbers. But right now, all the numbers that we have are pretty inconsistent. So, okay, so this is about another report that was done. This was via Washington State. I don't know if I'm going to address this one. I could go on for a really long time about this one, just because of time. So the National Institute of Justice has listed more than 4 in 5 American Indian and Alaska Native women have experienced violence. These are just some of the statistics that I was talking about earlier, written down again. You can look through that if you want right now. Statistics are really important for things like when you're trying to get legislation passed. For me, I don't tend to reference statistics so much. I'd rather reach people on an emotional level, right? So when I'm speaking to places, I'm like, here's the statistics, but let's talk about something on a heart level, because that's where you're going to see the change. I mean, numbers are cool, but when you think about the people, these numbers represent people, individual people. It's a little more changing, right? For someone who's never thought of that before. You can do the next one. Okay, so this is another Blair Imani graphic that we put out. It just shows like, look at all the blue and only a little bit of red, right? So, but these are people, right? These are relatives. So what's being done and what can you guys do? So we have grassroots efforts like local walks, runs to raise awareness. There are also local searches for relatives in the area who are missing. Search parties. My husband has been on multiple search parties on horseback. One time they found someone. So it makes a difference. A lot of times the horses know. They can pick up on different things. Dogs can pick up on different things. Local financial support to the families of these needing to come from out of state. This is another thing Sovereign Bodies Institute helps with, which I think is fantastic. Indigenous-led nonprofit organizations conducting research and compiling data. These are all super helpful ways of contributing to the fix. Legislation, we have the Savannas Act, which recently passed. And this bill directs the Department of Justice to review, revise, and develop law enforcement and justice protocols to address missing or murdered Native Americans. And I actually sat in on the training or the I can't think of the word for it. National Roundtable. I can't remember. There's a panel, and I was able to listen to them discuss what specifics were going to be done. The different trainings, how to train. I sat in on a NAMUS training, which actually was for police officers only, where they sat in and learned how to properly record missing names and information into NAMUS so that they can have better, more accurate numbers. Okay, and this talks about Savannah Lafontaine Greywind, who was murdered She was pregnant and her neighbors murdered her, cut her open, took her unborn baby out, raised the baby for, I don't know, a couple of weeks as if it was their own. They stuffed her in a dresser and dumped her in the river, the mother. She was found 8 days later. So I remember when this was happening, I remember because this was all we could think about or talk about in our house. So it's pretty upsetting. I know that the daughter is now reunited with her father and she's thriving and she's in her community. But there's some real change with, as horrible and tragic of a story that this is, there's some real change that came from this on a national level. And it brought even more attention to the issue that exists here today. Okay, next slide. So yeah, it requires that the Department of Justice does training for law enforcement on how to record tribal enrollment for victims, develop strategies to educate the public, conduct specific outreach to tribes, tribal organizations, and urban Indian organizations regarding the ability to publicly enter information through NAMUS, develop regionally appropriate guidelines for response to cases of missing or murdered Native Americans. Basically, it's like you're forcing government agencies to face it head on. You need trainings on this. You need to talk about it. We know it's uncomfortable. We hate it too, right? Let's talk about it. Let's fix it. Let's get what we need to happen. And what this helps do is to create a relationship between tribal nations and police forces so that that they can work together on something as opposed to arguing about jurisdiction issues. Okay, so it also has the DOJ to provide grants for all of the developments, for all of the brainstorming, all of the protocol developments. Federal law enforcement agencies have to modify their guidelines to incorporate the policies developed by the Department of Justice. And the FBI must include gender in its annual statistics on missing and unidentified persons published on its website. I'm not quite sure my opinion on that is. Okay, next. Okay, so this is another act that was passed in 2020. If you want to look through that. I'm not going to read all of it, I wrote it already. I always hate that when I'm like, why is the teacher reading the slide when it's right in front of them? So these are some of the things that happened on the legislative understanding, which brought additional change. It's great. There's not one way to fight this issue. We need a whole bunch of people on the ground attacking this issue from multiple places and angles and spaces. So I don't think there's anything wrong with choosing different avenues to come at a solution for it. Okay, what can we do? What can you do as an ally? Somebody who is leaving here enraged and, okay, Corinne, now what do? I'm pissed off. This is a problem. I want to be part of the solution. You can give your money to any of those organizations, but really, like I was saying, that's like bare minimum. But it helps, right? We always need more funding for these research and these things. And if that's all you're able to do, that's fine. But attend events, okay? If there's a search party or if there's a meeting happening, I'm not saying go attend the event and be like, hi, I'm Stacy and I'm pissed off. No, don't insert your anger into that situation. Attend, listen. You know, it's important to be there to hear what relatives are saying. You live in that community and there's relatives missing in that community, I guarantee it, right? So it affects you too. You can be an ally in marches. So one of the ways that some coworkers of mine really showed up for me in a very tangible way, which I love giving as an example, is I was setting up for the march in Minneapolis. That's my first year working there. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to set up this table. I put the tablecloth out. I was going to put all the pamphlets out. And Dan and Jessica are the two non-natives, the only two non-natives who work at the whole organization. They walked up and they're like, okay, cool. We got this, Corinne. You go ahead and march. What? I thought for sure I'm going to be sitting here explaining to people, answering questions all day. But they're like, no. Well, we got all this. We put it out. We've done this every year. Go march with everyone else. And what that did was it allowed for me to release responsibility of doing any of the grunt work and just be with my relatives. I could take the time to just be in that space, to march and to think about those who were missing or the different relatives who had passed away. And it was like, oh my gosh, thank you. That was a great way to show up for me in that moment. Because then I could actually really just enjoy being there, right? And that's a great way to be an ally in that space. Is like, what's the grunt work? Do you need a tent put up? I know how to put those event tents up. I've had experience, whatever it is you're skilled at, show up in that area and be like, this is what I can do. Where do you need me? A great way to help. Speak to your communities. Everyone in here, think of 5 communities you have access to. I'm talking, this could be your church choir, this could be your parent group, this could be your student group, this could be any, think of, you already right now have 5 communities you have access to. You have a relationship with all of those people already. You already know how to talk to those people because you've met them and talked to them about other stuff like, hi, I watched Gilmore Girls. I really like this show. Whatever, you know how to communicate with them. More so than I do. How do you reach them? You walk into that space and you reach each of these communities and be like, hey, I see that you're dressing up as a Native woman for Halloween. I'd really like to have a conversation with you about why that's not okay. You're already in. If I did that, they'd be like, who the hell are you? Right? Or they'd be more defensive, but you already know them. You already have an established relationship. You can talk about tough topics in the way you know they will hear you. Because you already have that understanding. So think of those 5 communities you have access to, and that's places you can practice your allyship in now, tomorrow. Oh my gosh, I sat in on this class by Corinne Grey Cloud, and it was really upsetting. I learned some stuff. It was really disturbing. Oh, isn't your dad a cop? Has he heard of this before? Does your dad's force have a task force specifically for missing murdered Indigenous women? Oh, they don't? Have they heard about it before? Done. Conversation started, right? You're already in that community. Use it. And then work site. Great. So that's my presentation. We can do next one.
Yeah, we can do 10 minutes. If anybody needs to leave at the hour, feel free, to do that. But Corinne's happy to do a Q&A either with the folks who are on Zoom or any of us in this room. So yeah.
Corinne, have you heard about the relationship between like Grey County and several counties in Oklahoma with BIA police to combine resources so that the Chickasha police, the Grady County Sheriff, and go on to Indian land and they can actually arrest, the jurisdictional boundaries.
They share jurisdiction.
Melted away, yeah.
Okay, that's great. I like that idea. I think also some contributing factors with that is the recognizing that of Oklahoma as being right. So they changed jurisdiction boundaries with that, and because those local police forces already existed, they kind of had to do it that way. But I love that it did happen. Yeah.
I do have someone on Zoom. Julie would like to know if you could speak a little bit more to Spirit, what Two-Sprit people are.
Oh, okay, so yeah, I can give a brief little explanation. Two-Sprit is a term that was coined at a conference in the 70s. This is not a culturally traditional term, but it references having 2 genders within one body. Every culture has their own term for the LGBTQ gender non-binary spectrum. And I have had conversations with Lenny Hayes where he's like, I encourage those to find what term culturally they had for that community, because every community has a different term. But that's what Two-Spirit is. And that's why we included Two-Spirit LGBTQ, is because they're all kind of grouped together. Questions, or even if you don't have a question, something that you want to discuss or that stood out to you, or something that was like, I know it was a lot.
I had a question with, in Minnesota, how many reservations are there?
Oh, no, I'm not Ojibwe, and I don't remember.
I think there's about 9.
Is there? Okay.
Do those statistics include natives who do not live on reservations?
So the statistics from the Garden of Truth study is specifically from the women from Bemidji. If you want to know whether they lived on a reservation or if they were urban, that would be in the study. But it's definitely accessible if you check it out. It's on the Minnesota Indian Women's Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition website under their resources tab. They have all their studies that are there, and that would be included in that. Yeah. Oh, also in terms of self-care, if you're Native, I highly suggest smudging yourself after this. Smudging down. If you're not comfortable with smudging, then I suggest drinking water. Water's medicine. Drink it, please. Just let some stuff go. Go walk on the ground for a little bit. I mean, it's cold, so maybe don't take your shoes off, but just do something that grounds yourself again. Just reconnect with you. I'm here. This is a tough topic, but I'm okay, and I'm going to do something about it. I know I will be doing that. I was just playing with like, I wish I had my sage with me, and I didn't even bring it. I just left it, but I don't think we could smudge in here. But anyways,
I
yeah.
have one more question. Can you speak to the meaning behind your medallion?
Oh,
And there, it's hard to see on Zoom, so maybe show that out.
I know. Where's his face?
Oh, it's on there.
Okay. So this was a medallion that was made to me by my friend Marissa, and she designed the whole thing. And I saw her post another one and said, could you make me one too? Because I speak on this issue and I'd like to wear it or have another thing to be a conversation starter, right? So it's the red dress. It's a woman in the red dress, and MMIW is what's on it. So that's what this is. Yeah.
So, we just got out of the meeting. I just wanted to ask a question about, since there's so many statements going out, what your opinion are, if there is some way to have an official Native American opinion about things like the tomahawk chop and Indigenous Native American people names being used, college football, baseball, etc.
Right.
Is there some kind of official statement, or is there anything that you
Well,
think about what they're?
I wish it was easy. I wish we all had the same opinion on things, but we don't. And that's where the problem comes in, is that, so I was even sharing with Melissa that my husband is Lakota, Dakota, Nakota. He is like Grey Cloud, okay? But he is a Kansas City Chiefs fan, die hard. And I'm just like, we got together and I was like, you do know I educate on why this is horrible, right? And he's like, whatever. This is the only representation he had growing up of seeing himself somewhere. So you have a community that understands this is harmful and dehumanizing, and look at all the other problems it causes. But then you also have within that same community a generation of folks who, this was all we had. This was literally how I saw myself. This was how I didn't feel invisible. This was how I felt like, look at this stadium full of people who don't want to kill me right now. They want to celebrate me. And so I have to have compassion in my education for that viewpoint, because that's real. I have relatives and family who really find connection to that. So while understanding that it does cause harm, I have to simultaneously embrace that that is really powerful and meaningful to some other natives. And that's how they felt seen, because I was literally the only representation we had. So while it would be nice to have one underlying understanding about it, every tribal nation and every community is going to feel differently because of the different traumas they hold and because of their different experience or ties to that kind of thing. When it comes to things like, well, what should I call you? Is Native American okay? Or Indian or American Indian? Or what should I call you? I get to ask that a lot. The general answer is ask. Ask. Because every single Native person will have a different opinion. You know, for me, I am comfortable with Native. I'm comfortable with any of my nations, Mohawk, Lakota. I am comfortable with Indigenous. Okay. And so as an understanding, American Indian is a term that is used in our treaties. So when we talk in a government documentation or we're speaking in government about Native communities, we use the term American Indian. Why don't they get rid of the Indian part? Isn't that kind of offensive now? We have to use that verbiage because that's the verbiage written in our legal documents. We have to remain consistent. Because if we suddenly cut that out, then they're gonna be like, well, you're not talking about those people anymore because you're using a different term, and then it gets arguable and messy and blah, blah, blah. So on a person-to-person, ask. Like, how do you prefer to be identified? Or what are your nations? I always love when people say that. When they find out I'm Native, they're like, oh, what are your nations? I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have to explain to you that I exist. I'm like, okay, so we first of all, we start at the understanding that you already know there are multiple Native nations and that we're not a pan-Indigenous people. You already know, okay, that's great. I know where I can begin on my relationship with you. I don't have to educate you from ground zero, right? So always ask is the best thing I can say.
How is the information that you know that's influencing like how you and your partner are wanting to raise your kids, especially your daughters?
Oh man. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I'm raising like my daughter how I talk to you guys. I mean, age appropriate, of course. But like as an example of like how I'm seeing it come back to me, I brought my daughter to the doctor and she's 8. And for the first time she has a male doctor. And I remember we left and she was like, huh, that's weird. I said, what? She goes, well, I guess men can be doctors too if they work really hard. And I just remember being like, this is the world she exists in right now. And I was just laughing and she was like, it's not funny, Mom, they work really hard. I was like, I know. But it's, you know, it was neat to see like, oh my gosh, she feels really just without even like, oh, I'm empowered. No, that's her reality. She's like, this is the world I live in. And I'm like, okay, so we're making some decisions in our home, in our life. And one of the things that we have talked about that is different from her previous, how she saw family is a healthy relationship between myself and my husband, communication. We have had discussions where the children are arguing and they're not getting along. And my husband will say, he'll turn around and say, when have you ever heard me talk to your mom that way? Have you ever heard me speak to your mom that way? And then the kids will be like, never. And he's like, right, because I love your mom and I wouldn't treat her that way. And I said, you love your brother, it's your only sibling for now. Why would you talk to them that way? And then feel bad, apologize, and, you know. So those dynamics in our home translate in just how we're living. But yeah, they are obviously pretty impactful to how we're raising our children. I mean, and we're heavily involved in our culture. We go to Sundance, we go to Sweat Lodge, we pray, we know our culture. My husband is a equine therapist, and he works specifically with young boys who are victims of sexual trauma in our community, locally. And he also works with the National Men's Coalition Against Violence. And so he speaks on a national level about helping masculinity, and then works also with men who've been convicted of domestic violence. So our home has a lot of different energies and exposure to thoughts and thinking. And then we kind of just live with our culture, with our children, with these understandings, with how to communicate in a healthy relationship. And so a lot of the issues that come up that can contribute to continuing trauma as opposed to halting trauma in families I feel like we work really hard to halt those traumas. You know what I mean? Yeah.
One more question. No, this is something I don't know, again, question. I know my great grandmother, she was a pretty mild person, but sometimes we did homework with my father. She'd see Christopher Columbus discovered America. She would pretty much explode at that point. So I wonder if there's anything that being done to re-educate people on that myth and make it more factual accurate so people understand more about the contributions of Native Americans who actually found out.
Right. I think there is, at least I see it happening on social media. Again, social media being used as a tool for education. I know this generation in here and my generation and even the generation above me and the generation younger than us in here all have access to social media. This is like, I'm talking TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. You know, all of those platforms are being utilized to change narratives all across the board for all different kinds of issues. And that is being utilized a ton for things like that, right? Shifting the thought. But then we have issues within the school system, right? Teachers and lessons, curriculum that needs to be updated, it's being perpetuated and continued, but it's changing. It's just happening at a snail's pace and with a lot of resistance, right? Critical race theory, all that stuff. South Dakota right now is trying to erase teaching about Native history and culture in their classroom. South Dakota, hello, like, like this is like filled with Lakota people, and there's marches and all kinds of things happening right now in our communities to make sure that they don't erase that from the school. But it's an issue that exists right now. So it's just something that's always being fought, and it revolves around watching your language, changing how we speak, making sure we don't use past tense when talking about Native peoples, that we talk about thriving natives today, as well as pre-colonial learning, right? Because then you have my job where I go into companies like Walmart and whatever, and I have to educate and provide supplemental education to adults who think I'm dead. Right? So yeah. Also, Thanksgiving is about being thankful. The end. Go eat your turkey and love it, but also like that never happened in that story you learned about in school, and just be thankful for your family and your friends, and that's great. And that's my short, abridged Huffington Post version.
Thank you, Corinne, for everything. Grab a flyer, the rest of the programming for Heritage Month. Feel free to stick around. You can get my email because Corinne will share some of these resources with me if anybody wants it, or just come say hi. And otherwise, have a great rest of your day, everybody. Appreciate you coming.